Beautiful.
Yes.
Well, thank you. How about you,
Thanks, Phil.
Lensis?
I am doing well. Yes.
And Esther?
Esther is doing well. School starts very soon, and we are getting ready for that new adventure.
And how's
Yes.
your mother?
She is doing well. Um, the situation in Venezuela is very interesting,
Yeah.
and it's it's interesting. Yeah, but she is doing well. Yeah, yeah,
So let's you and I, while we're here,
yes,
think about how we can get better.
yes.
And discussing the mental obsession
Mhm.
can be difficult. I know it's challenging. And my experience is that interest, if people are interested in growth and enlightenment and those things, they tend to listen better than people that feel everything's fine and they've got it figured out and they aren't open to that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just a choice people make.
Mhm.
And I know that when you and I started here, I think the impulse initially had to do with somebody else that you were seeing and all that. And then the focus sort of shifted into realizing maybe this is something that is interesting to me too, for other reasons, broader reasons. And my experience is that the one thing we each do is make choices about how we think of things. That's the one thing we seem to be free to do that nobody else does for us.
Mhm.
And it's also the one thing that we do that impacts our experience more than anything else because it determines how we see things and then what we see them as when in fact the seeing may not be accurate. It's
Mhm.
just a supposition of thought, literally a position taken in thought, a choice.
Mhm.
So coming to terms with that is also my experience is that when I have a thought and I simply think the thought is right and the thought isn't right, I begin to create an internal conflict
Mhm.
because the only place that thought resides is within my brain. And it
Mhm.
has no connection to reality because it's fantasy. It's just imagined.
Yeah.
And the idea that I can take a thought and think that it's right is the beginning of belief in that thought as being all that I am. I all of a sudden feel like I am my thoughts because I'm the creator of reality with respect to how I'm thinking about that thought.
Mhm.
My sense is this has gone on through human history and sort of like when they discovered that the horizon wasn't the end of the world and that the world was round, you can't ever get to the horizon. The more you move toward it, you can't fall off of it because as you move toward it a foot, it moves a foot.
Mhm.
And so the same with our thinking. If we think the thinking we're doing is limited, and I think my thinking is right when my thinking is wrong, it's the limitations of my own thought that feel suffocating and depressed and at odds with reality as though reality is at odds with me because if I've got the thinking backward, I'm going to see everything as having doing it to me rather than being caused by me.
Mhm.
Same way they imagined that the horizon was the edge of doom. That was the thinking, not in all people, but some people, that they'd fall off if they got to the edge because they thought the world was flat. And my sense is the doom they felt wasn't the edge of the world. That was the excuse they used to justify the thinking they were doing that was doomed.
Mhm.
Because our bodies are very well attuned because they're a part of reality. They're built on the basis of nature. They're not built on the basis of being excluded from nature, and we need to figure out through our lifetime how to get back to nature. If the whole time we're looking for nature, we're looking with nature, but we're looking unnaturally for nature, it's going to give an impression that somehow it's out there and lost and we can't find it, when in fact it's never been lost and it can't be found as a result.
Exactly. And Jack, how we as humans could see that we are getting better, or how can we realize that we are growing and doing better? How can we see that? How can we
How do you generally see that?
my actions, like around me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Around me.
Well, my sense is that if the ultimate freedom we have to think is free,
Mm-hmm.
and we choose to think something that causes us to feel contempt and condemned,
Mm-hmm.
we're free to do that. And what happens is typically we think that exterior you're talking about, our circumstances and situations, are things we don't want, when in fact they reflect exactly the thought we wanted that has us now seeing them as something we don't want. Because again, we're blaming now the circumstances and the situation rather than the cause of the thought.
Mm.
So how we get better is literally, this sounds odd, but it's actually getting better at feeling what's wrong.
Mm.
And really, I only say that because generally speaking, when we're trying to be right about a thought that's wrong, we get stuck in a groove of thinking we always have to think positively. We always have to think good about everything and everyone. We have to
Exactly.
work on being grateful because the basis of our experience is not grateful, because we're unhappy for what we're doing. We're shameful. We're ashamed of what we're doing. We're guilty for what we're doing. And it isn't good. So we're trying to overcome that essence by creating a whole host of narrative storytelling and ideas and blame and shame and fault. And a lot of that I watch in my own experience, especially initially, was seeing that I had a really good idea of what was wrong with the world and how other people were, and how impossible it was for them to do what I was talking about and thinking about, and how they'd never do it, and how it's just impossible and it's just difficult. No, and I realized that's my thinking. It has nothing to do with
Mm-hmm.
them. If I am taking an absolute perfect state of being and making believe that it's only what I think, once again, I have limited the entirety of humanity to the impossibility of living up to my narrow expectations, not because that's true, but because I've decided it's true. And I'm fighting for that in a thought to begin to try to prove that what I'm doing is right. So reality and truth has no proof. There's the proof is when you align thinking with reality, it works. Whatever you do works. It's abundant, it's productive, it's gainful, it's beneficial. If you see
Yes.
somebody ride a bike when you're a kid, there's a tendency you're going to get on that bike and ride it a lot quicker than if your parents tell you to get on the bike and ride the bike.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see kids do it and think, oh, I can do that. Boom. All of a sudden it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
In that same way, we've created this contrary idea that we need to fix the thinking first before we can have reality, before we can be realized and actualized. Self-realization and self-actualization is all about that. But the self that is trying to be actualized and realized, if we're stuck in this loop of thinking about a thought that's true, that's not true, is a self that's simply imagined to be real that isn't. It's just a delusion. It's just an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say two things in simple terms for your answer. One is we feel wrong. We feel guilty. We feel ashamed. Those are accurate feelings for what we're doing. They're not accurate feelings for the things we attach out there and think that it's because of what we're seeing that's wrong and guilty and all that. And we often treat guilt and shame as feelings, and they're not. We're feeling with our feelings what we're thinking, which is guilt for what we're doing and shame for doing it.
Wow.
So it really changes the whole. I'm not depressed when I feel depressing thoughts. I am able to notice in my body that the thoughts I'm having are depressing.
Mm-hmm.
That's very different. That's like getting ice cream that's melted and wishing it was frozen. It doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to eat it very well. It's going to be a mess.
Mm-hmm.
So if I think of it as something it isn't, and think all it is what it isn't, I'm on an endless road trying to have faith and belief and confidence and ambition and build myself up when the self I'm building has no basis in reality at all, because the basis in reality has never been impaired by anything I ever thought. Nothing,
Mm-hmm.
ever. It's impossible. So it's really beginning to see that we're sort of still like the sailors and people who thought the world was at the center of the universe because we looked at it from this place. It seemed because we were here, we must be the center. And to think that I am centered in my thinking is to start to actually explore the inner universe of our capacity,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, functions very, very similar to the outer universe that we look at and see. Very
Mm-hmm.
much so. Things that matter to us, we call them the gravity of the situation. It's the weight. What matters tends to have weight. In the universe, what matters tends to be energy that is almost consumed by itself, meaning it's a form.
Mm-hmm.
And the more energy you get, the more gravity you get. So you get this attractive pull. So if my pull is to an energy, something that matters because I think what I'm trying to do is right, what I'm going to be pulling in is only seeing everything that's wrong. And I'm actually going to be
Mm-hmm.
creating what's wrong to try to prove this wrong is right and think I need to overcome the wrong to get this right, this wrong right, rather than say, oh, it's a setup from the beginning. It's what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's never anything more. It's how I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And if I begin to come to terms with that and begin to embrace it rather than run from it and try to feel better than it and try to overcome it, all of a sudden I start having an actual reckoning with what's happening in my own manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
So my sense is we don't create reality, we create effects. And we're so ashamed to be witnessing these effects and also have the idea the only thing we can do is keep producing them. That's where the shame's coming in. We're stuck in a loop thinking we're going to get out of it by maintaining it. And that's just
Mm-hmm.
like in alcoholism or drug addiction. The goal isn't to stop drinking, it's to notice that it's when we start that the problem occurs.
Wow.
So if I'm always trying to stop, that means I've already started. So it's
Yeah.
tracking back to what happens in that reversal. If I think a lie is true, I'm seeing everything backward. And I start seeing that the effect, how I'm feeling, is the cause. So I
Mm-hmm.
try to treat the effect. And modern science basically tries to treat depression with chemicals. We already
Yes.
have the
Mm-hmm.
most incredible chemical factory in our body, better than any chemical factory on earth, more complex, more, not even complex, more able in its
Yes.
amazing capacity. We don't even have to understand it for it to be able to do what it does. And yet, stress and anxiety and that fear that's caused
Mm-hmm.
undermines every one of the body's abilities because it puts it under stress and pressure. So it's dysfunctioning on the basis of an emergency we're creating in our brain that doesn't even exist. Our
Yeah.
survival instincts all reverse, and all of a sudden we're killing ourselves in the name of thinking we're saving ourselves. And suicide today is at an all-time high. Drug addiction's at an all-time high. Not a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
It's a consequence of simply not facing the essence of our human existence by noticing that the essence of our being existence has always been in perfect order, has always been accessible, has always been the nature of
Yeah.
our nature. Always.
Yeah, that is the point. We need to realize who we are as humans and to know that we have everything, that everything is already here. But the mystery that I don't understand is why some people, yes, we are aware about it, and some people are not. It's
Well,
interesting.
I would say if we're thinking in absolute terms, everyone is aware. Some people don't think they're aware, and other
Mm,
people think they're aware. Because
mm,
we've been relying on thinking as reality, we think if I can think a thought that's wrong is right, I can think
mhm.
the thoughts I'm having, I'm not having. And we
Oh,
And we call that subconscious. And largely, even in psychology, subconscious is considered the greater motivator than our seeming conscious, because it seems to be operating invisibly, compelling us to do things that seem to catch us off guard. In my experience,
Yes.
again, I realized that I was keeping all of the thoughts I wanted to be irresponsible for in the dark. And just like a kid, when the lights go off, all of a sudden felt haunted by all of those thoughts and lived a life of fear trying to overcome those thoughts while it was me hiding them in the dark and thinking if the lights were off, I couldn't see them. They aren't there. And yet I had this haunting sense that they might be. Right. And there's the fear, the anxiety. So my sense is that as I began to admit that I was thinking things I didn't even think I was thinking, I all of a sudden started to have a relationship with rather than deny those things and think they were in the dark, all of a sudden the lightness, both in terms of weight and light, meaning bright. And if you think of the words that are concurrent with the present, like current is both now and fluid. It's a charge. It's a movement. Right. So the newness of now is always available in that word, and also in light. There's one other one too that is very telling, and I'm missing right now. But if the present nature is the present, and it's all we ever are, and all we ever, it's the only place we ever are, and it isn't even a place because it's in this infinite zone. Then to start acknowledging that as the basis of our existence allows thoughts to begin to express that knowingness rather than be busy trying to counter produce an effect that gives us a further impression that we're right about what's wrong in terms of that thing. And I would say that's the most fundamental thing that would be diseased, because it's literally a lack of ease that's impossible to get better the longer we maintain the basic thinking about it. And it's so simple that it takes no effort at all compared to the effort it takes to continue to repeat it and think that somehow it's going to get better. That's an enormous effort that never works. And in this case, it's just saying, oh, I don't have any obligation to do that. I'm perfectly free right now. And when I'm thinking in those terms and not acting on that other thinking, I all of a sudden have the natural state becomes more obvious because I'm not acting oblivious. And that oblivion is exactly what that darkness is, what we call the subconscious. How is it that we're so aware of the subconscious that we can talk about it openly and then say we have no idea what's going on in it?
Wow.
It's interesting. And it's pretty consistent in terms of the mythology about it. So if we can create what we think is a self that we've referred to as our self, as though it's separate from I, like I am thinking to myself and I am thinking about myself, and I need to fix myself and I need to find my true self, as though truth can be lost. It's crazy because the I is being announced while we're talking about this other self that is obviously a problem, not with the self, but with the thought I'm having about the self.
It's very interesting because I remember thinking that way. I remember thinking I need to fix myself.
Right.
I remember. I don't know why I thought that way, but I always blame me for everything bad happen. Is something, if I plan something and I didn't start the result that I wanted, I always say it's my fault. Okay, I need to fix this. I don't know. I was that way. Now I'm different. I just accept the situation, learn, and that's it. Whatever.
So here's what's interesting about that, lenses. And you, one of the questions you asked, the question you asked was, how do we know? Okay.
¿Cómo sabemos? Yeah. How we know.
Conflict is the knowing. Inner conflict, emotional turmoil, mental anguish. All those things are happening because we're on ready alert. Our natural system is saying something's wrong.
Yes.
It's like a dashboard light flashing, and we think, well, I put oil in it. There should be plenty of oil, and we keep driving, whole engine collapses. In our body knows if we keep going this, we're asking for bigger and bigger and bigger problems. There's a statement that pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. It's almost as though until we hurt a lot, we're unwilling to notice what's so obvious because we slowly desensitize ourselves to the feeling we're having. So the wrong we're doing all of a sudden becomes so right. We don't think of it as wrong anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what's interesting. It's a little twisted, and sometimes I get it better than others. But if the thing we're doing we think is right that is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it interesting that we know it's broken by wanting to continue to fix it? And yet we think the fix is in out there somewhere rather than the thing we're doing immediately.
Very interesting.
So there's another conflict, right?
Yeah.
And it within the structure of behavior and all that, the conflict is consistently that way. I'm trying to get better about something that's worse. Well, if something's worse, why not just notice it's worse? And now I'm not trying to get better. I'm getting better by having what's worse. I'm actually being better because now I've aligned the two. They're not disconnected and they're not disjointed. So, what's the alignment? The ability to express the knowing because I'm not creating a useless conflict that's never going to be resolved, that draws all my attention away from noticing why would I even be doing that? I'd have to be crazy to be doing that. And that's really the answer. It's a
Mm-hmm.
self-induced form of insanity.
Mm. Wow. And that is the thing. That is the point.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So we're generally thinking of the effects as the problem because we have it backward. So
Mm-hmm.
modern medicine treats the effects. It gives people chemicals. We have this
Yes.
incredible chemical factory. And rather than say, what is it about the thinking that's causing the instability of the chemical body to
Mm-hmm.
fix itself?
Mm-hmm.
Because the body itself, as a body,
Mm-hmm.
is fully capable. It's designed to balance. Homeostasis is the balance, the healthy balance
Yeah.
in a body. All of our bodily systems are designed to maintain that. It doesn't mean it's always in perfect balance. It means that as it shifts back and forth, like a tightrope walker, they're not always in perfect balance, but they're in balance enough to maintain the next step and to get through. It's when they get way out of balance that they fall. And that what I would say in our bodies are disease. When we get so
Mm-hmm.
out of balance that the body just succumbs to things that would easily be dealt with
Mm-hmm.
within the context of the. Now, here's another thing that's interesting. We don't need to think about any of that for our body to do those things.
The body naturalmente does.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah.
body.
So think about this regarding the subconscious. Here's an aspect of our body that we rely on to even think about our thinking. We rely on it wholly. And yet, that same thing we don't understand but rely on, just like we rely on gravity and oxygen every time we take a breath, it seems to be there. We don't sit
Mm-hmm.
around and wonder if there's going to be enough today. We don't
Mm-hmm.
wonder if there's going to be enough gravity to keep us from floating away.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, these things that seem so complex even aren't even understood yet. Gravity isn't fully understood within the best physics, the best minds today, but it doesn't impair it from working.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to understand it for it to be working because we use it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing in our thinking and our natural body. When I begin to actually make believe I need to understand what's wrong, I'm trying to give credit to something being wrong that's insane as though it has a life of its own. And I have to figure it out, myself out, and get myself fixed up. And there's
Mm.
nothing there. It's just
And
more and
and
more story about this.
exactly. And that is why sometimes we live life like a circle, the same circle. Like is yeah, it's interesting.
Well,
Wow.
there's vicious cycles and there's cycles.
Mm.
And my experience is that we're sort of there's a pendulum, a range from very, very sad to very, very happy, from very, very bad to very, very good, to that sort of thing. So it's a range of things that are happening. Life
Mm.
itself doesn't change. It just is life. It's an absolute state of being and essence and all that. So it doesn't go in circles. It doesn't behave. It doesn't think. It doesn't act. It's just a present state of being that allows for all the possibility that we're witnessing, all of it, including the idea that we create our own reality and then subject ourselves to the rigors of trying to have enough faith in our thinking and wonder and think then we've created, humans have created images of God that all act very human because they punish us and they demean us and they're vengeful and they're hateful and all that. But they're also called love in most cases. They're talked about as being infinite, but in fact, all the behavioral issues look very, very human. And so if that essence is that essence and that essence is love, probably doesn't have arms and legs, and it doesn't come and go, and it doesn't give me more or less, and it doesn't give you more than I have, and all that kind of stuff that we think of. Because there's nothing more or less to give in something that's infinite. There's no gradient, there's no time in it. Interesting about the moment, if it's always new, which if you begin to just pay attention, you'll notice that everything you're looking at is constantly refreshed in some way. And while it's always changing, that doesn't change. All that is changing, but the moment never seems to change because it's always the sum total of all those things happening. So if the present is always present, that is in fact something, if it's always new, it can't get old. So it can't be in a time continuum because the time continuum always has a past and a future. And if the present's always new, there's no end to that. So you're talking once again about an infinite state of being that we are absolutely present in all the time, thinking we're not present, thinking we need to become more present, thinking we need to train ourselves to, what we're really saying is, I'm in the present, but I don't seem to be paying much attention to the present. I'm paying a lot of attention to things that aren't present. So while all that's happening, I'm thinking about all kinds of things that aren't happening at all, except, by the way, in my thinking.
That is an amazing point. I remember years ago, Jack, when I had experience of living in the past. For example, my experiences. I love it to be in the past. Like I wanted to go to that place. I wanted to be with this person. Or I wanted to do this. Always in the past. I remember years ago, I was stuck in the past, but I learned how to live in the present. And it is so beautiful to live now, right here, creating new experiences, creating new experiences now. It's so beautiful.
So when you were thinking you were living in the past, you were actually living in the present. Thinking was so real that it was in the past. So where were you the whole time?
In the present, but thinking in the past.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, in the present, but thinking in the past. It is no good because we lost so much living in the present. I remember how many moments, beautiful moments I lost just thinking in the past and living in the present. It's crazy.
Well,
it's no good.
At a being level, we haven't lost anything. At a human level, we recognize that we haven't expressed everything. And I would say the greatest grief we have, the greatest mourning we have, the greatest sense of loss we have is the fact that the present moment, being the sum total of all previous moments, reflects the deficiencies of those previous moments in terms of our thinking and as a result, our actions. And generally speaking, in my experience, people are generally trying to overcome all of the regret they have for the things they didn't do, could have done, wish they'd done, when in fact, there's nothing more that can be done about that past because worrying about it, regretting it, is simply doing exactly the thing that they're regretting to begin with, which is paying attention to something that isn't happening in the name of thinking it's all that's happening right now. All that past. So if there's any potential in the present, which I would say it's all possible. It doesn't mean everything's going to happen that's possible, but it means everything that's happening, everywhere anything's happening, is obviously possible. So that's That's a lot compared to the little bit I might think I want or think I need or think is going to fulfill me and satisfy me and finally get where I think I need to go. But Even when I think I get there, I don't feel good because I've been nursing the thought that where that is somewhere else. So when I get to that else place, I feel still at a loss because I'm still thinking it was going to pay off while I've been denying the present the whole time. I've been learning how to manipulate rather than simply experience the freedom, the knowing, the awareness, the purity. So in all those stories, like the story about you being back then doing that thing with the past, the present is where that experience, while it may have been disjointed and may have been less than you're able to do now, is the curriculum, kind of like the school textbook for learning.
Exactly. It's just experiences to learn. When I realize that, it's like, okay, I'm free. I just feel free. Oh, because life is beautiful, and I am conscious that we have this life, this life, because I don't remember having another life, just this life. And if I have another life, I don't have memories about it or experiences. So I value so much this moment, Jack. This life is so beautiful to have this experience. I'm so happy having this experience with you, talking about something that million people they don't are thinking about it because they are thinking in the past, or they don't I don't know.
Well, so if there's any mission in all this, it isn't to see, well, we obviously recognize that there is sort of a diminished capacity in terms of intellect, and ignoring things and pretending that they're not there is the basis of ignorance. That's obviously not smart.
Yeah,
it's not intelligent.
Finally, yes.
So to notice it and see it as something that we're impacting by how well we're each doing, because the one thing I have is the chance to choose how I see all those people. And what I really realized was that they all have the same nature, but are struggling in various ways with the thinking, because I apparently, and maybe someone else too, haven't been very influential in discussing things honestly enough for people to say, oh, maybe I'm doing that too. Maybe there is a possibility for me that I didn't think was possible. And maybe the impossibility that I've been perpetuating is simply something I'm doing with the thought I think is right when it's in fact wrong. Maybe. And what seems to happen in getting sober, for instance, is people start with the idea that maybe I have a problem, and then start to learn a little bit. And then they say, possibly I have a problem. And then with a little more eye opening, they say, definitely I got a problem. So our job is not to, in my estimation, I'm reading something about a Russian psychologist that came out of the 1800s, the early mid 1800s into the early 1900s. His name is Gurdjieff. He's a Russian psychologist, and he was really left unrecognized, but he was amongst Carl Jung and Freud and all the other big names at the time. But his contention is much more aligned with what we talk about, because modern therapy is contingent on a therapist. And his point was, nature's our therapist. We already have a knowing nature. If you treat that, you can actually begin to develop the human capacity by understanding, by creating exercises and practices. And all of those things are available. Now, I don't know what that all involves, but I know that he was a guy that made the statement that humans are asleep, dreaming they're awake.
Wow.
So he's pointing to this fact about humans as a species, not as something that's happening to a couple of people somewhere, sometime, somehow. And all those people that we can talk about as separate from us are both impacted by what you and I think, and we are also impacted by what they think in every moment we ever exist. The sum total of all that's impact. So if you think you have no impact, imagine that you're impacting everybody already, and you're being impacted by everybody. That's a pretty synonymous, synchronous, absolute, inclusive bit of awareness. Once people through history began to notice that they could sail toward the horizon and see continents and islands and tropical paradises that nobody ever imagined, all of a sudden everybody just started doing it. They stopped thinking that thought and they just started acting on it. Because what's natural doesn't take a lot of thinking. It happens. And my sense is, while this can seem very inflammatory to talk about and very reactionary and very hard to comprehend and hard to understand, all that kind of stuff, all that's being struggled with are the limitations of the thoughts having been presumed to be so real that that sense of reality is being shaken a little bit. And it should be, because it's already shaking in its boots from the anxiety and the stress and the pressure and the inability of people to function happily, wholly, and naturally. So if we talk about it openly and honestly, we're doing the part we can to begin to recognize it. And as I began to see that everybody already knows, we couldn't be a species if they didn't. We couldn't be a species if we didn't have the same nature. And then nature, beyond that, the plants, the animals, the minerals, all of it, all things, also have this nature. Because if the nature is absolute, it can't be different for one or the other. We're just expressing it in different ways. Just like our body is almost identical in terms of DNA, but we all have different traits. We look a little different, a little taller, a little lighter, a little this, a little that. Those differences are very, 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 very minutely fraction of a fraction of a fraction compared to the similarities that we all share. And we already have it because it's been all that there was to have. So having thoughts, we can't be thoughts. I don't become a pencil because I have a pencil.
Exactly.
I don't become a car because I have a car, but I can feel that who I am is more impressive with a car because I'm thinking that things like my thinking are who I am. So what do I want? More things, more stuff, more. It's never enough when I'm trying to fill a hole that doesn't exist in a thing that doesn't exist.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And that's addiction right there.
Exactly. Completely. Yes, I understand that. I remember having that kind of experience in the past. I remember when I was 21 years old, I remember wanted to have everything I wanted, but I always felt empty. So I realized that I needed something else, a spirituality. I needed spirituality. And that I remember that time when I was looking for God and I was complaining, ¿cómo se dice? Contemplando. Okay, is out there is a lot of God. Buddha is a Muslim, is a lot. Okay, so I wanted to read about each one and see, because I wanted love. I wanted to connect with a spirituality, but based on love. Okay, because God is love. So I wanted to connect with that. So I connect with the only ¿cómo se dice? The only thing that I liked was the story of Jesus. Jesus. And it's like, I want to read more about this guy. And I was in love with that way that Jesus
Well, and think of
was.
what he talked about. Forgiveness and healing. It's
Exactly.
largely
And
what he
love.
talked about. Well, and that's forgiving is actually love in motion, because it's starting to give things what they are rather than think of them. Not forgiving something doesn't have to do with the thing the person did, but has to do with what I think of what they did.
Exactly.
That's the lack of forgiving, is thinking, again, this wrong thought idea that thinking is our reality gives me the impression that what they did was so bad I can never forgive them because I am holding against them something they are no longer not doing, by the way.
Exactly.
So who's the culprit? Who am I not forgiving in the process where somebody else has stopped and I continue to hold it against them, but my own experience? I am nailing myself to the cross, thinking I'm going to pay the price if I suffer enough to finally create redemption, when in fact it's simply a thought I'm having that has no basis. imagined to be real, and as a result, I don't think I can get rid of. Now, what's interesting again about that, like I'd mentioned earlier about the ironies, the fact is, when we think something's real, we know that reality doesn't change. So what do? When we think it's real, we don't think we can change it. We
Mm-hmm.
don't think we can do anything about it. Very interesting. That's exactly what addiction is. The only thing I can do is the worst thing I can do is, since I have nothing to do with it because I think it's happening to me, and the alcohol has me and the drugs have me and
Oh
all
my
that
gosh.
stuff, I
Yes.
got it all backwards. I'm thinking I can't do anything about it. So what do? The same thing I keep doing because I think it's the only thing I can do. It's textbook addiction.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
consider when you started thinking about those different versions of seeming God, those different ideas of God,
Mm-hmm.
and you said you felt empty, you were
Mm-hmm.
feeling thoughts that had no basis, had no substance. They were just forms of thought, just imagined, that are
Mm-hmm.
empty.
Mm-hmm.
Illusions have no basis. The idea that I become what I think is the idea that I'm an illusion turned into reality. That's fantasy as reality. That's called
Yes.
insanity by modern definitions. Now, this
Wow.
isn't a medical diagnosis or prognosis, but if this is in fact the case, and I suspect that it is, then great effort has gone into trying to fix a delusion, a
Mm-hmm.
self that has no basis in reality. There's a $10+ billion self-help movement in our country, always
Mm-hmm.
trying to fix and repair and get people to feel better and do more and
Yes.
fulfill their resolutions and follow through and all that kind of stuff. This is like dragging an anchor.
Mm.
And we're giving people a bungee cord, and they think they're outrunning the anchor, but it's getting tighter and tighter and tighter as they go. And eventually it just slaps them back in the ass. They wonder, what happened? How did I get here? People kill themselves over this.
Mm-hmm.
They feel the futility. They feel the inability to do anything about it. They think it's life, and it is not life. It is an idea about life. It is a thought about life.
Yes.
If we can have
Yes.
thoughts, thoughts are things. And if thoughts are things, they are also actions we can take. They're actions we
Yes.
take in our thinking. The primary action is thinking. The secondary expression of that is either going to be sick in terms of the action, polluted, corrupt, harmful, or it's going to be beneficial and useful. And what's interesting is when somebody operates on the basis of something beneficial that they recognize relates to reality, our whole airline industry throughout the world, if you ever look at a map and see how many planes are in the air right now,
Mm-hmm.
came
A
out of
lot.
two guys. Wasn't just them, but they figured out how to make a wing. Orville and Wilbur.
Yeah.
They figured out how to make a wing. Why? Didn't come immediately. They crashed a bunch of planes trying. They failed miserably over time, but they saw that what they were doing had some evidence of progress. Within that other
Mm-hmm.
thinking, the progress is only the pain we're suffering that's going to get louder and louder and louder and bigger and bigger and bigger until it finally meets the amount of faith we've been having in the faithlessness and the amount of belief we've been believing in the unbelievableness and the amount of hope
Mm-hmm.
we've been having in the hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
So you see the contrast there again. There's a conflict there. When I have hope in something that's hopeless, what's the hope? There is none. What's the
Exactly.
promise of a lie? A broken promise. It's not going to give me
Yes.
what I think I want or think that I'm
Oh
doing
my
it. I'm
gosh.
never going to get anything out of it.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So now,
Exactly.
another thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you were thinking you needed to look for spirituality, you were thinking of it as a thing out there somewhere,
Mm.
right?
Yes. It's because I remember when I was little, I remember having 7 years old, Jack.
Yeah, yeah,
And I remember I had in my brain already this interesting thought about I need God in my life. It was so interesting. And I grew with thinking I need something superior than me to live
yes.
this big life. It's very interesting. But you know what is interesting about, you say something about our that I am realizing that if I want something, if I want to eat something, first I think and then I manifest. Interesting. If I want to do
Always,
something, oh my God.
always. You know why? Thinking is the primary basis for choice and action. And choices, by the way, always are attached to something we want. So
Mm-hmm.
every choice we make is a prayer. Every one of them.
Wow.
Because nobody prays. If they pray for what they want what they don't want. So it's always attached to a want. So our choices become our prayers, and our willingness to concede the ramifications of those choices become our meditation. That's
Mm,
you used the word earlier, contemplation.
yes.
So to
Wow.
consider things doesn't require any decision or any conclusion. It's just to watch what's happening. Open eyed, not just when you're quiet in a quiet room, thinking you're meditating and feeling better for 20 minutes and then get out and wonder why the world seems to trigger so much pain. We're not dealing actively with the world, facing it honestly. So we keep thinking of it as something we don't want to face because we want to get back to those quiet moments that we've mesmerized
Mm-hmm.
ourselves into making believe are more pure and more stable and more quiet and peaceful than our present state, even when we're in the midst of disruptions.
Mm-hmm.
I read something yesterday that said that the only two types of people that don't try to always feel better are psychopaths
Oh my.
and fully enlightened humans.
Mm.
Interesting. There
Mm-hmm.
again, you see the divergence. So a psychopath now has gone completely numb to the conscientious effects he's having, no compassion whatsoever. And my
Mm-hmm.
sense is they do those things, those hateful, hurtful things to other people because they
Mm-hmm.
want to witness what they're unable to conceive is possible for them. They want to see that fear. They want to see that death in someone else's eyes. They want to witness it full on because they're so afraid they've just shut down around the idea that it could ever be them. The thinking for them is a self that's so buried that they think the only life they can find is by burying other people. On
Oh
the
my
other
gosh.
end, the enlightenment says, if it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's bad. I'll look at it, whatever it is. And to the point we're discussing, if I am free in my absolute nature,
Mm-hmm.
I am also freely able to see things that are disturbing as disturbing, and see things
Mm-hmm.
that are wrong as wrong, and see
Exactly.
things that are bad as bad. And my judgment about what those things are gets better when I'm no longer fighting to avoid them, but beginning to embrace them and seeing that we all have the capacity. And to any
Mm-hmm.
degree, those things are happening in the world today that are despicable and hateful and harmful. It isn't happening over there somewhere. It's happening within my thinking that I have nothing to do
Yes.
with it.
Oh my gosh.
That
Yes.
creates this impression that somehow it's somewhere else with some, like you were talking about finding God. You needed to have God rather than say, I already have God. The only thing I'm not doing is thinking about it accurately. And as a result, I'm creating an emptiness that I know I need to over. Isn't it interesting that we know we need it when we think what we need to do is maintain the thoughts we're having that we can't stop?
It's
Interesting.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why we are that way, but we are that way.
My sense is, my sense is we're having a relative experience in a
Mm.
form occupied space. But if we're looking at it accurately, there's a lot of absolute nature to be realized that we're actually looking at. We're just forms amongst forms. And love ultimately would not be love if it said, you can't think everything. I'm not going to allow you to think things that are right or wrong and wrong or right.
Mm.
Ultimately, it's love giving us that chance to realize the essence of it in our functional capacity by beginning to love one another and beginning to act in ways that actually
Mm-hmm.
align with that reality, that freedom, that generosity, that support, that absolute embrace.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So my sense is love provides all possibility. That would be
Yeah.
even the possibility to think it isn't love, to think God is hate, to think God doesn't exist. All those things become possible in the nature of love because love isn't threatened. It's only thinking about love that's threatened when it's narrower than the capacity of love. So whenever I'm thinking about it, I'm not thinking about love. I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about love. And when I start to realize that my being awareness is actually that nature, that loving nature, I can start to concede that I have a lot of impulse to operate on the basis of things that are not very loving. So now I can witness the wrong and say, oh, well, that's probably not the best thing I could be doing. And yet, if I've done it, it's done. There's nothing I can do about it except to think of it as though it's something I can do something about that isn't here and start doing the same thing I'm trying to overcome in the moment by repeating and repeating and repeating my regret about something that's already over. There's nothing in the past that's over. There's nothing in the present. There's nothing in the present that's over. There's nothing in the present that's past or future. It's just now.
It's now. Wow.
So here's some absolutes. Everything is everything.
Everything is
simple.
everything. Simple.
Everything happening right now is happening right now. Everything.
Everything
And we, by
right
the way, are absolutely a part of all that to even be thinking about it. So the thing we do to try to confirm it is the thing that's confirmed by it before we start doing the thing we think we need to do. It's already here. It seems absurd to think that we've been here all along because it seems like the investments we've been making and the lies we hoped would come true have been fruitless and useless. And that's an actual realization that's actually aware of what's happening. It's starting to notice, yes, that is in fact the case. I thought my investment in insanity would somehow pay off in reality, when in fact the payoff is realizing there was nothing I ever had that was an investment worth anything. It was all just illusional. And I'm perfectly free to do that and continue. When I embrace that I'm perfectly free to do it, I no longer regret it. I start realizing it isn't the best thing I can do. And sure, I can succumb to that at times when circumstance feels overwhelming, and it's really just overwhelming the limits of my thoughts that now seem to be so threatened that I go into this automated mode of reaction and impulse and compulsion.
It's very interesting because science call emotional intelligence when somebody notices the thing, they are aware. Wow. And we have emotional intelligence.
Well, let me, even beyond feelings are not just emotions. Emotions are basically happy, sad, glad, or mad, sad, glad. That's kind of how they boil down, right? So those are emotions. Emotions are sort of, think about the word, moving.
Emotion.
They're reflecting the light passing through us. The motion, the immediacy. If the present is present and it's an absolute loving source, Jimmy's coming in. If the present is present and it's an absolute loving source, it's pure white light. Because the combination of all colors is white. So think of how we think of emotions. If I have mental obstructions, things that matter to me, I'm obstructing the flow of light. What else does that on Earth? Prisms. What do the prisms do? Break down the light. What colors are they? Red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, violet. I think it's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, basically that range, but an infinite number of variations because the differences are so tiny that they can't even be calculated.
Wow.
Okay. Now, how do we think of of feelings? Blue, sad. Green, envy. Yellow, fear. Red, anger. They're all associated to colors. So emotions are colors, but our feelings, like you said, I felt empty. You were actually accurately feeling the thought you were having that had no basis. To think you were alone without God had you think that it was actually true because you believe in the thinking as being your source, rather than recognize that the thought was telling you the thought's empty. The thing you're thinking is empty. Reality, you are disconnected from that absolute source. The thought you're having has no basis.
Has
So
the
when you
meeting
said
started already? Sorry.
about an hour ago,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. This
So
is interesting. This is so my brain is
so now think of what we'd call that body language.
uh-huh.
It's not a foreign language. We treat it like it's a foreign language when we think it's the opposite of what it's saying. That would mean everybody we heard in a foreign language, we immediately think, I don't understand you. So what are we saying? I don't understand what my body's telling me. Because I'm obviously hearing that emptiness means I'm empty. It means I'm disconnected. It means I'm alone. Because we take it for granted that what it's telling us is what we're thinking. We're not now thinking about what's being said as accurate. We're thinking about how we're thinking about it inaccurately. And there again is that addictive tendency. My sense is within the addictive nature of thinking, we see only what we think we see, and we hear only what we think is said. And that game of telephone that most kids play, when you tell somebody something and they tell the next person, within 2 or 3 people, it's so wildly different than what it started that it's a pretty good indication that thinking isn't always the most reliable conveyor of what's
We
happening.
cannot trust our
Wait, no, you can trust it, but it's just not
sometimes.
reality. It's just an impression. It's a process that's analyzing. It's trying to come to the best. The brain is so analytic. It's the best computer, by the way, on earth. When we talk about the chemical factory being the best factory, our brains are better than any computer on earth. And they're really doing their best, even though we're undermining them with stress and pressure. They're doing their best to help us survive. They're designed to help us survive naturally. But within addiction, all of the survival tendencies, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, fawn being the newest added, which is trying to make nice to the enemy. The flight is denial. We think we can run. We think we can get into something outside of us to fix it. That's drugs. That's buying more and more and more. That's having more and more and more, thinking more will be enough, and enough is never enough. The flight is we think we can escape it. What happens when we run? Our heads go with us. The thoughts come with us. There's nowhere to go where they're not.
Yes.
And if they aren't with us, we're not conscious at all. We're either in a coma or we're dead. So the idea that becoming desensitized helps us when in fact it's numbing us is actually a suicidal thought and a suicidal tendency, because we're trying to desensitize our awareness by making believe we don't exist. It can't possibly be us. I have nothing to do with it. I need to get over it. I need to pretend it's not happening. While in fact, all of my bodily actions and manifestations are telling me something's wrong.
If we are aware about our own thought, we can save a lot of problems. A lot of problems.
Well, my sense is we're aware of it, but we act as though we're not, so that we can continue to think it's something we have nothing to do with. That's the whole idea of the subconscious. I kept all the thoughts I thought I didn't want anything to do with in the dark, so I could say I have nothing to do with them. And what would the impulses be? To end up doing exactly what it was I said I had nothing to do with. So all of my outward actions would end up being the things that I said I didn't have anything to do with, and wonder why I keep doing them. Those are compulsions. They seem to be happening to me because I'm pretending I have nothing to do with it.
I am realizing that my thought, the only thought that I can trust are those when I think something that I need to do, or I need to use my brain to create something that I want to build or to do. Yes, only.
I'm going to push you a little bit in another direction. If you're listening accurately to if you begin to assign your thoughts to your thinking, rather than think of them as something you need to overcome and get away from and feel better than, you'll start vaporizing the thinking, because you'll see that it makes no sense to be doing something that gives you a sense of emptiness. If I feel empty, I know I have an empty thought. So if I stop and say, I wouldn't be feeling this if I wasn't thinking something that's empty. I don't have to look for the thought. I've just aligned with it. It isn't somewhere else that I need to go search, because I've been doing that my whole life, a lot of my life, thinking it's out there somewhere and I need to find the answer, rather than admit, no, it's the immediacy of my own experience. If I begin to align with it and simply concede, if I feel bad, I say, you're having a bad thought. You're nursing a bad thought. You're addicted to a bad thought. There are no thoughts that are true that we need to be addicted to because truth doesn't come or go. It's always available. It's always right. It's always here. The only things that we're addicted to are the ideas we have that we think are reality, and then end up reversing everything by not paying attention to the feelings we're having that are telling us. By the way, feelings are all labeled by words, which are coming from the brain. So the feelings and thinking are almost identical in terms of their function. They're symbiotic. They're opposite, seemingly opposites in the same coin. You can't have a one-sided coin. So if my feeling is saying I'm empty, I'm disconnected, I'm alone, and I say, well, I must be thinking a thought that's empty, disconnected, and alone. And what would that be? Obviously, it has no basis. It has no substance. There's nothing I can understand about it beyond the fact that it's nothing more than a thought imagined. And if I begin to give it credit for credit due, it evaporates. I have no conflict. I'm not creating an opposition to it. I'm not pretending it's real enough to oppose. And what's interesting, you can't oppose reality because it never changes. And in this sick way, we think that we're opposing something that doesn't even exist. The insanity is thinking it's real. The insanity is making believe there's something to oppose rather than say, there's nothing to it. If I begin to assign the words that I'm experiencing that seem uncomfortable to the thoughts I'm having, in that simple way, I don't need to get into the details. I don't need to get into the story. I don't need to get into the whole thing. I've been using that story to help make believe they're true so I can tell people this story and get their agreement, because I know that I need votes to support the contention that something that's imagined is reality. So it just vanishes. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't other levels of things that I'm going to come. As awareness grows, awareness of what's wrong grows. And awareness of the potential to actually right those wrongs grow, because intuitively, survival means correcting what's wrong. And if what's wrong is wrong with someone else, correcting their wrong, helping them correct that wrong, being an agent of change in the regard of actually helping, actually creates greater survival potential for me. So it's more altruistic than this seeming self-serving where all I want to do is get, and I'm getting it at the expense of everyone. Now it's about giving, and actually noticing everybody already has. And if I already assign them to already having it, now I just begin to see that they've got some problems in their thinking that are small compared to thinking that it's who they are in reality and all the rest of that, that makes it seem impossible to ever help.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, well, and interest, think about the interest we must have in making believe that what isn't happening is happening, to be obsessively thinking about things that aren't happening, hoping someday they'll be true. Imagine how much interest we've spent, and how much willingness we've spent, and how much belief we've spent, and how much faith we've had, and how much hope we've had on something that's absolutely never going to happen. And now go in the other direction. If we begin to admit that we're absolute in nature, and that nature is our nature, doesn't take a lot of belief at all, because immediately there's some relief. And as it's applied, it becomes more and more useful. Rather than continuing to apply this idea that somehow I'm going to get better by pursuing what's wrong and fixing it, you begin to realize this has never been broken. I just haven't been spending any time expressing it. I've been spending a lot of time not expressing it and wondering why I'm no good at expressing it. And in my experience, I'd had a lot of this, just like you're thinking when you were 7. I remember hearing about the first person that died in my life. I was around 5. And for years, I thought to myself, being in a coffin forever. And I began to realize forever never comes. It never ends. That's torture. But we're
Yes,
not talking about forever here because it's not a future, it's a present state that
it's a
absolutely doesn't
present.
change. And all the rest of the change is made possible by that. It's just a possibility of all that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
forms that we have, like bodies are forms, are designed. The number one leading cause of death is birth,
Wow.
because it's bound. The whole arc of this life we're living as a human starts, middle, and end. It's a story.
Mm.
Now, is the story valuable? Does it have a moral? When I was a kid, they used to say the moral of the story is this. You don't hear that too much anymore because the stories are so much of an excuse as to why we shouldn't be where we are with what we have and wouldn't be here if it weren't for this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
Never about having it all now, all about what we would have now if it weren't for that stuff, whatever that story is. That's an excuse. And there are
Mm-hmm.
no excuses in reality. There's no justification, rationalization. There's no analyzation needed for something that's absolute knowing because there's no thinking going on.
Yes.
Here's Katie visiting.
Katie! Katie!
I'm gonna go play tennis.
Okay.
I'm not gonna open house.
Aw.
Is that my coffee?
It's tea. Do you want it?
Hmm.
Do you want it?
No,
Aw.
Okay.
thanks. She drinks the best tea.
Aw.
So acting as though we're better when something's wrong is denying what's wrong. It's an attempt to pretend it isn't wrong and think that it'll get better magically when in fact it reinforces. In the same way we do it in our own experience, we can do it with others. So the difference is now that I'm not mired in my obsessive thinking about that self I think I am all the time, which is really just thinking about itself. And it isn't a miracle that when I think more about my thinking, it creates more thinking, which is what the obsession is, the idea that I'm overrun by thoughts. When I start actually disbanding that and diluting that, and actually the delusion is actually the dilution of it's a dissolution, meaning that the problem was never there, it was just all make-believe. So when I see that, boom, it's gone. Now I start seeing there's a lot in the world that could use some attention, healthy attention, and be spoken about in real terms, not in these fallacious, we've got to stop that. We need every major thing we think we need to change socially in our country. We have a war on poverty, war on drugs. We have a war. That's no way to start. That's just reinforcing the idea that conflict's going to somehow survive. There is no conflict in absolute justice and reality and truth and love. There is no conflict at all. It's just a simple reckoning that it has happened multiple times through history, where people just finally came to terms with how things were, and everybody very quickly started operating on that basis. They noticed it, heard it, made everybody's doing okay, fine. In the same way that happens, we can think that there's nothing that we can do because everybody's going to keep doing the wrong thing. And it's the wrong we're doing in our own thinking about everybody else that helps reinforce that.
Yes.
Yikes. So now this is real responsibility. We are naturally responsible, and yet we can act irresponsible. Doesn't make us irresponsible. It makes the thoughts we have and the choices we make to act on them irresponsible. Very different than I am irresponsible and I'm just a low life and I'm a failure. And all those things are really, if you listen to those words and apply them to thinking, the dysfunctional nature that comes out of the idea that we're creating reality and are thinking about our thinking. Failure is guaranteed. Think about that. That's success. We've actually succeeded at failing so many times, and we don't think of it as credit. We think of it as uncreditworthy. But in fact, we've failed so many times that we've been a major success in that regard. It just doesn't produce results that are helpful. But we're successful at it. When you start to see it in absolute terms, we're successful at failing. We're successful at losing. We're successful at acting disconnected. It's our thinking. It's the seeming. It's like we've been playing a game and we didn't think the rules were the rules. And so we kept losing and thinking somehow it was the game that was the problem. Life is not a game in that sense, but it certainly has parts that we play and roles that we assume, and a potential for a story to be moral, meaning the story,
Yes.
the narrative of what's happened, to actually have morals and justice built into it, because it's the nature of nature.
Mhm.
So feeling better is actually getting better at feeling bad, getting better at feeling wrong, getting better at feeling discontent, getting better at feeling all the things that are typically thought of as things to get over and feel better than. The actual feeling better is actually just getting better at feeling. What does that mean? We're actually allowing our body to tell us what's going on. It's giving us perspective. It's offering us insight, just like people do when they offer us their thoughts. Very often, hearing somebody's thoughts about us, we think is an assault and hostile, because we think it undermines who we are. It's not who we are. They're just simply commenting on their observation of what they're seeing. They're giving us perspective. So in my experience, relationships are broken off with fuck you or thank you. And when I'm taking it personally, because who I think I am is the person of my thoughts, the persona, the characterizations, I'm the character of that persona, acting like an actor, and somebody says something about the role I've been playing that isn't aligned with the role and the script I've written and been playing, I think of them as assaulting me and hurting me and harming me, rather than actually giving me perspective to say, thank you. I didn't see that. I appreciate that you actually pointed that out, because I didn't think it was something I was actually doing.
I
So
think this
if we're,
ego, the ego.
yeah,
I think that when we don't react that way is because we have so much ego.
well,
Yeah.
obsessive thinking is all ego, all of it. We think of ego as this funny little thing that happens every once in a while that's an inflated version. But what could be more inflated than an idea that almost occupies no space whatsoever? It's in our brain. It doesn't even seem to have any shape or size. It's just a thought, all of a sudden becoming reality. What could be more extraordinarily preposterous than making believe that a simple thought, that is ego. The idea that something wrong is right is ego, in a sense. Now, here's what's interesting about ego. Talk about these twists. Ego, by definition, is the capital I. It's not the little baby I of myself that I've made up that seems to be scampering around. It's an I. An I typically has been in the shape of an I-beam, like they put in steel structures. Interesting that an I-beam is stronger than it would be if it were solid steel, a square tube of solid steel, right? Look at the small I. Small I looks like a body with a head, no arms or legs. Can't do anything, has no functional capacity, can't operate. So ego, in essence, originally in the Latin and Greek, is I. I am thinking of myself. What have we done? Assigned it to the little self to give the little self credit for being I. And we talk about it as this impish, mischievous, troublesome aspect of our character, as though it's distinct from us. People talk about their ego like it's some body in them, which effectively is what schizophrenia is. It's a split personality, a dual personality. What are some of the major disorders? Bipolar. We're trying to segregate the polarizations. The polar opposites on this planet add up to 1 or 0 because they oppose, but they collectively even out. To think of something as the opposite and not the other thing is exactly what a lie is. All it is true. It's the one thing it can't possibly be. Disassociative. Think of that word. There's disassociative syndrome. We're disassociating from the actual experience we're having by making believe it's not happening. manic depressive, hyper, happy, depressed. That's the range. We're thinking I should be one and not the other, rather than seeing that both are possibilities. It's only a position I take when I think it's the only position I can take that has me feel committed to one or the other, as though it's the only thing I can do. It's just a choice.
It's interesting because we have similar experiences. We had that kind of experiences once in life. It's interesting.
Well, and lenses,
gosh.
I don't think it's unusual in my experience. Like most of the guys and people that I've worked with, it's been more guys than women, because I think they tend to have a greater confidence in a guy when they're talking about things that they've done wrong, and but most of them, well, they never come asking for help to think more negative thoughts and feel worse. First of all, but I missed the point I was going after at that point. Oh, I asked people to start thinking about the words they use in that self they're talking to start witnessing that, start observing it. So what I normally hear initially is, oh, I don't do that. I said, okay, consider that you might do that. Consider you might do that. Okay. So now that we know you don't do that, consider that you might do that. Right. And the next week would pass, and all of a sudden, well, I did notice a little bit. Then another week would, and pretty soon they're like, oh my God, I would never put up with that from any other human being, because every one of these thoughts that we think are real is fighting to be heard. It's fighting to be recognized. It's fighting in us, and we're the ones causing that fight. And all those voices, I hear people say, the committee in my head. Think of it. It's not just one voice. It's not just one self. There are hundreds of selves, because thinking of itself, for every thought we maintain, has a self of that thought itself. But that thought isn't our self. It's just our thinking. It's what we're doing with our thinking. It's a misuse of our thinking. And I wouldn't even say it's misuse. It just isn't productive. It isn't helpful. It isn't useful. So it could be said to be misused. But before, to your question earlier, why do we do it? If we have the possibility of doing it and recognizing the possibility creates impossibility, much better to be kind of like an airplane. All airplanes can crash. They certainly aren't built on the basis of crashing. Right? They're built with the idea that this is going to fly and we're going to get the bugs out. And I mean that recently, if you look at the thinking going on in the world, some of the aircraft carriers have had some major problems occur as a result of the thinking that went in, and the idea of trying to speed things up. And they've taken the focus and the virtue away from the value that they were there to produce, thinking of it as something else. Hundreds and hundreds of people died in planes that were brand new that just crashed. To think of those things as possible is to begin to recognize the responsibility we have for those things when they happen, rather than act as though we have nothing to do with it. If it's happening, we have something to do with it, period. And I would say if it's happening, we have everything to do with it, because if I didn't exist in this human form, I would certainly then have nothing to do with it. So the fact that I exist, the fact that you exist, we are responsible for what's happening.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We are responsible. Yeah.
And yet we can act irresponsibly. The difference is it's an action and it's a thought rather than our being nature. It doesn't corrupt our being nature. It simply corrupts our thinking about our being nature and everyone else's. It's a mental problem. It's a mentality, not reality.
Yeah.
So a little homework.
Yes.
Notice during the week when circumstances happen that you don't like, that you're clearly recognize there's something in it that you don't like. And begin to notice that. Just begin to say, yeah, I don't like this. I really don't like this. And notice that what you don't like is that you have an idea about that thing that's happening, that it shouldn't be happening. Now, it may be that that's just an idea. but it may be also something that is pervasive and that's part of the litter that occurs, this campaign of litter that we're all infusing into this system of hysteria and nervousness and anxiety and stress by actually trying to reinforce the ideas we have that aren't right, hoping everybody else buys it. But what we're really buying into is this collective nature of insanity that's it's gonna have some blowback. We're gonna end up witnessing more and more. It's happening right now. We're witnessing it. Just start to notice those things. And rather than try to get over it and feel better about it, just notice it and live with, just sit with it. Say, yeah, I don't like that. And then just sit with it. Consideration requires no decision, no conclusion. And that is an awakened meditation. It's an actual contemplation of how things are. Doesn't mean they're right. I don't have to be right to say something. And I can tell you what I'm thinking even when it's wrong, and be honest. Honesty isn't about saying only the right thing. It's about actually saying the wrong thing too. And we've lost track of that because we've been thinking we constantly have to be right because the thoughts we've been trying to pretend we aren't having are wrong. So it's an embrace and an opportunity. Anyone out there listening, it's just a chance to actually do things that might not normally be done, to notice the value of actually seeing things in that way. And that conceding something that you don't like as something you don't like is actually what I realized was that I really like the things I don't like. Like I talk about them a lot. I don't like traffic. I don't like waiting in lines. And if I'm in traffic and I come visit with somebody, I got to spend 10 minutes telling them how horrible it was. Because I want them to be sure about my dislikes. Right? Some of that starts to evaporate. Some of it, not always. It's the thoughts I don't think I'm having that I'm plagued by. It isn't reality and truth. It's the things I don't think I'm doing that seem so pervasive, because when they occur, it's so outside of the realm of my expectation, because I thought I'd shut them down. I'd hid them. Why are they speaking up? Why are they having any impact on me?
Exactly. Wow.
All right. So that's homework.
Perfect. Oh my God, that is fun.
And the exercise and the practice is beginning to see that we've been practicing all along. We've just been entertaining insane ideas, which is sort of like playing tennis and thinking that you're going to use your left arm when you're right-handed and wonder why your game just sucks.
Got it.
So since we naturally know, as we begin to act like we know, the alignment becomes more obvious and the benefits become incredible, because it starts to be not such a big deal. And all of a sudden, very informative and very educational and very beneficial and very laughable, because we're not taking that self we thought we were so seriously as to think that anyone who didn't think like us was offending us. And the defensiveness starts to melt. All of those things. And it's so simple because reality is not complicated. Nothing could be simpler than something that doesn't change. So anything we're doing that's changing isn't reality. It may be a product of reality, and it may be designed to express reality. But it means if we're not expressing reality, it isn't reality. It's just a thought we're relying on as though it's real. That isn't true. It is not going to be real. The longer we go, the more mess we're going to make, and probably not want to even claim it's ours. So it's going to be a mess assimilated and assumed by many, many others as though we have nothing to do with it. And then blame them for having mopped it up.
And Jack, it's not condemnation when we realize, I don't like this. It's not condemnation there. No. Yes,
And the other thing, Lensis, is to see that those like and dislike are determined by thinking. So what happened for me is I used to always want chocolate because I like chocolate. But when they had vanilla, I'd think, oh, who likes vanilla? Vanilla, why would you ever? All of a sudden, I tasted vanilla and I thought, wow, vanilla is actually really good. It's not chocolate, but it's very good. And I started to actually realize I just had a thought so long that I maintained about chocolate that had me think vanilla sucked. I didn't even try it.
Got it.
I would be disappointed. And then I began to think about disappoint. I'm trying to make a point, and I'm disregarding the fact that when I make a point, I'm confirming all other possible points that can be made. But in the insanity, I think if I make a point, there is no other point, and anyone who takes a position at any other point is offensive and attacking me. When in fact, I'm confirming that everybody's as free as I am to make any point.
Exactly. Oh my gosh.
So the condemnation is occurring from our own contempt for the thing we're doing. Now think about this. We wouldn't feel condemned if we didn't know better. And think of how honest the condemnation is when you start seeing, oh, I'm thinking the thought I'm having, I shouldn't even be happening. There's the condemnation. It isn't the wrong thought. It's the thought I think it's real that creates the whole problem. I can have I have wrong thoughts all day long. I would say most of them are wrong. They're not absolutely perfectly suited for the circumstances I'm applying them to. But generally, they're suitable enough to get me fed, get me the air, get me the water, get me to and from where I want to go. Not always, but generally. So I don't even have to be perfectly right in every decision I make to generally get what I need and want. And think about needs. We normally don't struggle with needs. We struggle with wants. Why? Because when we need something, we just get it. We don't think about it. We just get it. I need water. Boom. We figure it out. Not a lot of thinking. Same with instinct. We seem to know exactly what to do when there's a real threat, which is exactly why we don't have any clue of what to do when the threat isn't real. And we keep trying to mop it up, fix it, get over it, feel better, all that stuff, because it doesn't really exist. It doesn't have the same merit, the same basis in our intuitive nature, because it isn't intuitive. It's completely attempting to rewrite reality and make believe as being make believe and fantasy as being reality. It's never going to happen. Now, the other side is when you begin to realize this and aren't condemned to thinking you shouldn't be thinking it, you start realizing that the creativity you've been wasting effectively. First of all, it's why we talk about being full of shit, because we're filling our heads with waste products. They have no basis. So we talk about shit to do. I've got shit to do. I got to get shit done. I want to get my shit together. Think about that. Who would want to do that was sane?
No.
Why would getting more shit together smell better? Right?
Exactly. You know what
But
is interesting?
We're aware of it to be causing that thought that's a waste. We know that we're wasting the time we have. We're wasting the moment on something that doesn't exist. But the bonus and the benefit is starting to learn that waste and that sensation is actually teaching us, you can go there, you're free, you can continue if you'd like. You can be addicted to it if you'd like. It isn't necessary. And as you begin to see it, the ability to say, well, of course I can choose that, but I can, if I'm free to choose it, without the condemnation, I realize I'm also free not to choose it. Why would I continue to choose something that doesn't work? That makes no sense.
Exactly. And that is the situation. That is the point. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Even people, the great in tennis, tend to practice, right? The greatest people tend to practice more than the kids sitting on the couch hoping to one day be a great tennis player. Right? So the best, the musicians, they're practicing. Why? Because within the realm of a relative effort, there's always more that can be done. There's always getting better. All of a sudden, the inspiration that has been seemingly blocked in our mentality begins to be the source of our decision making rather than the desperation of trying to get something right, trying to make up from it, trying to overcome, trying to make up for all the bad decisions. And I'm going to fix it once and for all. Why do I never seem to get there? And inspiration now turns that creative ability we have to imagine into an incredible bonus and benefit, because we start imagining things we never would have thought of within the desperate nature of the thinking, the reactive, defensive, and impulsive thinking. It just becomes natural. That's what it's designed to do.
Yes. Yes. Wow.
Rather than design a living hell from it, we begin to actually express the heaven, the nature of this bountiful thing that we think is up there
Yes.
somewhere when it's actually well within our reach right here. If we're willing to
Mhm.
look, we're going to see. If we're willing not to look, we're going to see exactly the opposite of what we think is happening, of what's actually happening and what we think is happening.
Yes. Sí. Wow.
All right, young lady. I think our time's up.
Oh my God, Jack, this morning was amazing. Wow. This is
Well,
beautiful.
you
Wow.
came to us and me from a different direction. You don't have the history and recovery that many of the people do, but you clearly have the presence of mind to notice what you're doing and participate in a way that's very fruitful for me, because you're giving me some guidance on where to aim my thinking so that we can both participate in the process productively. And I really appreciate that.
It's like you said, it's practice and learning and be aware about everything and appreciate life
Well,
and live in the
I
present.
I think we are aware of it all. We've just appreciated our ability to notice that because we've been thinking it was only up to our thinking. And life is beautiful, but the
Mhm.
things humans do are not that beautiful. And it's worth noting those things. It's worth noting that
Mhm.
rather than being caught off guard by this cavalcade of things that seem to be getting worse. And that's the, while we're here, it's probably worth mentioning those things and noting those things. My sense was when I started seeing things that were disturbing and was disturbed, I was finally
Mhm.
beginning to align with things accurately. So I didn't think of them as impossibilities. I started to see that they were things I could have an impact on positively and in a way that would be productive. It wasn't trying to be positive about them. It was starting to say, if it's a problem,
Mhm.
then looking at the problem is the beginning of the doing, rather than thinking it's something to get over, feel better about, thinking life is beautiful, when in fact all the things we're doing here are not that beautiful. So human experience very different than the spiritual experience, in that we have a range of things we can do and seeming limits and all that.
Mhm.
But the potential to express that infinite nature is to go way beyond those limits and even look at our own experience and say, I never would have thought that possible. And that's a pretty extraordinary thing to start noticing when you've been making believe that all that was possible is what you thought,
Yes.
when it was actually impossible. So I
Yes.
loved you and Esther, your mother.
Love you. Thank
Peace.
you, Jack. Thank you
Thanks for
so
coming
much.
today.
Thank you. I'm here. I love it.
See you
It's
around campus.
beautiful. Yes, it's beautiful to be here. It's my brain feels so amazing and happy sharing all this information and sharing this energy, and it's just beautiful. It feels so amazing. Fulfillment.
Peace. Love.
Say hi to Katie.
Yes.
Yes.
Will do. Thank you.
Bye, Jack. Thank you.
Bye, all.
Bye.